Um, so all of them have unique quirks and flaws and things. But all of them have people who are really interested in serving real developers, and it's very, very hard to do that without real developers. So for the past couple of years, we've been trying a lot of things to help that, and this is one of those things. So the end goal is to give you real. Okay, so this is part two. This is the speech recognition part. And last month we talked about this is like my homage to TV shows, like last week on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., right? So there's a long history of fails to standardize a lot of these. And there's this long, windy path, but somehow we actually did wind up with kind of buggy, kind of imperfect support, but text-to-speech support in all browsers. That isn't a standard. It's from an unofficial draft. There were a lot of people working on it in goodwill, but it's not part of a formal standards process. But it is actually in all browsers, so I'll leave that to you. Like, is it a standard or isn't it? What makes something a standard? That draft actually contains stuff about voice recognition as well, so that's what we're going to talk about this time. It's not nearly as widely implemented. Basically, Chrome implements it. But between Chrome and all of the Android phones and everything, that's like really loud devices. So you can play with it. It's implemented in Firefox, the Firefox OS thing as well, but it's off by default, and there is some disagreement on a few things. So really, Chrome is the one you have to play with. So there's a constructor, and I'm going to tell you a thing about constructors here. So you see this as new WebKit speech recognition, right? This is because this came out in 2012, and this is the way we used to do experiments. We used to put a browser prefix on them and then release them out into the wild with the idea that there can be a WebKit speech recognition and a MS speech recognition and a Moz speech recognition. they could all be implementing their own proposal. They could be not in any way related, like trying to achieve the same thing. In practice, that made developers mad. Developers didn't understand that, and they wrote these things where they said, if there's a speech recognition without the prefix, use that. If not, then you want the WebKit one. If not, then and they treated them all as equal, which actually has the opposite impact. Now, once everybody's built to that, we can't change it because everybody's relying on it. So don't do that. This is an experiment. Do yourself a favor and just use WebKit speech recognition because that's the one we're talking about. So once you construct one, it's not listening. And actually, you don't know if it ever will listen. This is how it knows when you want it to start listening. Curiously enough, you say start. And then that says you might want to listen now. But the draft says that before starting, it actually needs to check whether you have permission. So here's a briefish sidebar on permissions. The user agent, that's what a browser is called in standards terms. It is supposed to be your gatekeeper, right? Browser manufacturers and standards bodies are very, very sensitive to like trying to do their best to do that. And so they identify certain things that are like powerful features. You don't want every website you go to be watching you all the time, right? So you want to be real careful about letting accidental access to your video, to your microphone, to things like that. So while on your operating system, maybe if you install something, you're kind of giving it away and saying, have fun. At least on the web, there's a gatekeeper. Now, this is actually a really, really tough problem, and your mileage may vary. So web standards currently only specify how in mostly high-level loose terms. So what they do say is that sites have to ask permission, right? They have to actually ask you. They can't just, like a standard isn't allowed to just grant you permissions. They have to ask for permissions. So this is a little bit confusing why I say your mileage may vary. I just want to look at Chrome's thing here. So you see up there where it says this page is accessing your microphone? This is not listening to my microphone. What this is saying is actually something else. It's saying that it has permission to access my microphone. And you have to be able to manage and revoke that easily. So you see, if I click on that, I get the ability to change my mind. And in fact, it's not just this one, it's everything. You have to be able to manage those permissions like intuitively and intelligently. Obviously, we don't have good science behind this, so there's like a lot of experimentation trying to make that as safe and as easy as you can. Okay, that's the end of that rant. But the draft says that the browser has to tell you when it is actually listening. That's what this little dot is. If you see that little dot, that microphone is listening to you. If you don't see that little dot, it's not listening. Well, except that sometimes you can't see the little dot. Like, for example, when you're driving, right? If you're driving, you can't be paying attention to a little dot on your screen. You're talking to this is voice recognition, right? I mean, that's an ideal time to talk to your device is when you're driving. You can't be worried about a little dot, right? And so if you do this on your mobile phone, you'll hear a ding, bleep, right? That's telling you it's listening or it's done listening. There's basically a gate that you can hear. So assuming that you have permission, after start happens, now it's listening. Now what? Okay, so the voice recognition object that we created with the constructor, it pumps lots of events, like lots of different events. 3 of them are useful. The rest of them are mostly noise. So these are start, which is fired when the recognition service has begun to listen with the intent of recognizing. So you say voice recognition on start, or you can say add event listener and do it that way. And if this gets called, good, you have permission. There's on error, but you don't need this because what could possibly go wrong? And then there's the result. And that's called when the speech recognizer recognizes some text and has some text, recognizes some speech and has some text for you. So, wow, that's probably, if you're like me, you're like, wow, that's a lot simpler than I expected it to be. So, okay, how do I get the text transcript? Like you heard the sound, you gave it back to me, now I just want the text. It must be that little EVT thing, like that must be the text, right? No. So this is where you're going to have to keep your thinking caps on a little bit and pay attention. So the thing that you want is actually the transcript property of the zeroth element of the zeroth element of the results object of the event object. That's what it heard. This is how I remember it. It kind of looks like the speechless emoji. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wait a minute, results is a multidimensional array. Why? Not even. They're not even arrays. They're array likes, which just means that there's more than one and they have a length property, really. That's pretty much where the similarity ends. So all of the nice things that you can do with arrays, array methods and like splicing and concatenating them and all that, like you can't do any of that. These are not arrays. But the good news is that for most cases, there's just only going to be one, right? There's only going to be one item in there. And you want the zeroth one. So here's why the first one is an array. Because by default, there's a property on this voice recognition object called continuous. And by default, it's false. Once a result is received, it just stops listening. So if we turn it on, we say start, it waits, it hears some speech, it gives us back some text, and then it stops listening. That's it, it's done. But you can set this property continuous, and it will just keep listening and pumping more and more things at you. And so what they've done here is to say that the event.results.length increases by 1 every time. So you want the last one. So the good news is that this doesn't work. The implementations are buggy. It's quite possibly contentious. Remember I told you Firefox OS had an implementation? They didn't implement this part. They say, well, you can just restart it again. Why do we need a separate mode for that? Which sounds really good, except for those pesky permissions on mobile. Because what you wind up with is you want to dictate some sound and have it transcribe. And you say, okay, listen to me. And it says, ding. And you say, it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And then you have a pause, because that's how we speak, right? We pause right there. And then it says, bleep, okay, I'm done listening. And then your code restarts it. But in the meantime, you've said, it was, and then it says, ding, and then it starts listening again. That's a nightmare. So it's really annoying. For extra fun, you can add an I heard confirmation. And then you get the deeps and the blings and it hearing itself as well, which can just go on forever and ever and ever.
Sounds like a real great possibility.
So really there's just one result. And it's the zeroth one of the event.results. That thing is called a speech recognition result. It's also not an array. And also by default, it will have exactly one item. Here's why. Because there is also a property called max alternatives. And if I set that to a number, then that means I would like up to that many alternatives of what you think you heard. And each of these event result alternatives have a confidence property. We'll come back and I'm going to illustrate both of these things with a game, because this is like the most boring topic. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this little game where we have a series of cards, and those cards are going to have a little prompt, perhaps, an image where I'm going to show you something, a button that we're going to click that says, okay, listen to what I'm about to say, It's going to complete that, and then whatever it heard is just going to put the output into the pre that's associated with it. So you have these cards where you show you the picture and you're going to say what it is. So all of these, except for the last one, is going to use this pattern here, where we just go and get references to those elements. We create our speech recognition object. We wire up the on result and the on click that says when you click the button, you start listening. That will call our callback and output what we heard. In the last example, we'll add that max alternatives, and the only difference is that what we dump into the bottom will list the alternatives. Simple enough? Okay, say hello to my friend Bruce Lawson, who's going to help us play this game. So if you don't know Bruce, you should follow him on Twitter. He's former deputy CTO of Opera, very involved in web standards, author, great speaker. Also very funny. He maintains the website Inspiring Toilets, which is about web designers' toilets. And he has another Tumblr that's What is Bruce Wearing Today? That is an effort to reduce the deluge of emails that he gets asking this one question. This is the game that we're going to play. What is Bruce wearing? So I could just stand up here and answer my own questions, but I think it would be more fun if somebody else wanted to come and click the button and answer the questions. Does anybody want to volunteer? Is anybody that brave? Yeah. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so you're going to just click this button and then say what Bruce is wearing in a short,
He's wearing a white shirt and an overcoat.
Pretty close, pretty close. Okay.
Maybe my pronunciation.
That's okay. Do you want to try again, or?
He's wearing a blue t-shirt with a cat in it.
Pretty good, right? Okay. All right, I'll do these. Okay, so Bruce is dressed as Henry VIII. There we go, Henry VIII. Bruce is wearing a unicorn costume. There we go. Okay, so that's all using just the best guess, right? So it's just, here's what I heard. I'm just going to give you what I think it was, right? So to explain the max alternatives, we need something a little bit wonkier than this, right? And so Bruce agreed to help me out. And in this picture, Bruce is wearing what? So what is he wearing? So I'm going to say a tutu. So you see here, of course it nailed it on that one, but let's try it again. A tutu. I don't know why it's nailing it in all these. I tried this before and it, it's the demo gods, really. So you see all of these are things it could have said, right? And my guess is that it's like the acoustics of the room or something. Like if somebody else came up here and said something, you might not get that much. I've gotten a choo-choo, 8-2, like as well. And I have actually never seen tutu come up with the highest confidence.
Is there any learning in that software to adapt to your or an individual's voice?
So so if you have no context, right? You could say, who is this a picture of? Both these are really famous people, right? Known around the world. But if I ask you, please just say these two words, just fill in the blanks, right? Here, that would probably come out dolly and tutu, right? Which is not correct, right? So the context matters. The quality and confidence are like very arbitrary. Whether there's like learning involved in getting better at it, whether there's voice training, like all of that is like opaque and unknowable, right? If I can add context to it, for example, if I can say this is a photo of the Dalai Lama and Bishop Desmond Tutu, using keywords from the sentence, you could very nail it down, right? Like there's no ambiguity anymore, right? Everybody knows there's no Bishop Desmond number 22, right? Like everybody knows that. And if the service can take advantage of that, then it can do better. And the thing is, like, we don't know how the service works, right? Like that's opaque to us. And so one of the ideas with Max alternatives is maybe it's one way you could potentially deal with some of this ambiguity, right? You could ask for several renditions and then using some other form kind of pare it down to like this one is probably the most acceptable. Even the measure of confidence, like how do you mathematically measure the confidence of what you heard? Like, I dare you, right? It's like when your wife or your friends say like, how sure are you? And ask you to quantify that, like 83.5% sure. Okay, so to recap, results, the event.results is a speech recognition result list object. It's not an array. It probably contains exactly one item. That item is called a speech recognition result, also not an array. Unless you set max results, it will contain exactly one item. That item is called a speech recognition alternative, and any speech recognition alternative has a transcript property and a confidence property. It's almost too easy. No, really though, that's go.
Is the alternatives only for one word or for an entire sentence?
It is. Yeah. Do you want to go back and? It is for exactly what it heard. So, I don't know. Can you think of, because obviously it's up here standing in front of people, I'm not going to be able to come up with something ambiguous.
So if you said a jacket with buttons on it, will it give you alternatives?
A jacket with buttons on it. So it was pretty sure about that one because there's a lot of context.
But it does give you a list for the entire sentence and not just one word.
Yeah. A tutu. Yeah, okay, there you go. So it was pretty positive I said 822 that time. I've never seen it come up with all those zeros before. That's amazing. Yeah, so actually that really is kind of all there is to it from a high level. There's like more details and there's like weirdnesses and kinks and things. There's more on my blog about the native API and the kinks in it. And then there's also my own thoughts on how we might improve the kinks in it. And I'm happy to talk about those. We ended up doing that last time, but actually maybe we can pull up the... So remember I said there's a lot of events? These are all events that this thing pumps. A few of these are really self-explanatory in their life cycle. Like, you know starts have to occur before ends. So if they have the same name and they just one is start this thing and the other is end this thing, it's pretty self-evident that the start has to happen before the end. However, you could be forgiven for wondering like which happens first. Is it audio start or sound start? Because like that's not self-evident, right? So to answer your question, here's what the spec says. Unless specified below, the ordering of different events is undefined. So for example, this is still quoting the spec. For example, some implementations may fire audio end before speech start or speech end if the audio detector is client side, speech detector is server side. So if you're thinking to yourself, wow, that seems potentially really confusing and hard to work with, same. Yeah.
So where is the service running?
The
Is it
voice
all-
recognition service?
Yeah, is it all client side?
Yeah, that is a damn fine question. Let's talk about that. Okay, so there's a couple of other bits that, the properties that we talked about. There's like continuous and max alternatives, other bits of the object that we construct that we can set these properties. So one is a language tag. So if, for example, we set that to like Japanese, using just BC47 language tags, BCP47, like you would in lots of stuff in tech, then like it will gear toward recognition of that language as opposed to English, right? And it's supposed to default to the language of the document. So in this case, the language of the document is English, and so it should bear toward English interpretations of whatever you're saying, right? Another one is the service URI property that says, hey, you can set this so that I can specifically ask for this service to handle it, right, remotely. There is nothing specified about that there has to be a local implementation, but there does seem to be remote implementations. Wow, is it like right in the window?
Maybe.
I wonder if you can hear that on the stream. How did you do that? Is this a practical joke, really?
No.
Wow. That was amazing. It's like something on a TV show or something. Yeah, so there's nothing saying other than it should have a service URI, which a URI could be a local URI or a remote URL, right? In theory, it should work, but in practice, it does not, at least in Chrome. I've tried giving it other service URIs, and it doesn't work. And probably one of the reasons that it doesn't work is for that to work, you need an agreed on protocol for speech recognition, and we don't have that. So, yeah.
So this is running locally on Chrome?
So it's running on Chrome, and there is a local implementation, but there's nothing that says that it has to be. And it can actually use the network as well, like, because it's Chrome, but we did like run some tests and like disconnect the network, and like at least on Android, it seems to actually work. I know that there are like ports of some open source things about voice recognition that you can like actually download as little mini apps and things. That, so it's just plausible that you could do a pretty good job. There's also supposed to be a grammars property. So this is all I have to say about that, really. As near as I can tell, here's what the draft has to say about what grammars are supported. So that's just like the protocol problem, right? Like I see documentation on like MDN saying that maybe it's Java speech grammar format. That isn't the standard as far as I know. Like there's no web standard called Java speech grammar format. I know it's just like I know it's widely used, but it's not a standard. That's really rare, or maybe actually counter to a standard to reference a non-standard as its. Yeah, so that's it.
I have a question. You brought up the idea of like speaking out longer sentences, but I feel like I'm unresolved on what the standard, what the idea is to implement that. Like if I wanted to be able to like essentially write a paper or a blog post by speaking to it and then going through it.
Right. So, yeah, this is very difficult. So, if you wanted to do it where you're going to sit down in front of your computer, this is actually a good thing we could do on one of those build nights, like if you wanted to try it. So, if you can get the continuous thing to work, that is actually its purpose. That is literally its purpose. The people like Dragon Naturally Speaking and that do dictation sorts of things, that's why they want that continuous thing. Why you can't afford to drop, like you can't stop listening for even a moment. But if you can't get that to work, you could do the start listening thing, and if you could do it in front of the computer where you actually can see what it's writing, then you can like be aware of when it's recording. Right, exactly. So you could sort of monitor your own ability to do that pretty smoothly.
So on the same note, there's no internal way to set or adjust that pause capability. Like, there's no way to set, like, wait for this amount of pause. Like, as soon as you end a sentence, and that was the example with a tutu. I noticed the first time you said it, it was like, tutu. But if you say that quickly, you're going to get the R22 and all these other examples.
Right.
And I was just wondering, like, is there a way to adjust that end of sentence at all?
No. No.
Because I feel like that would be a different way to tackle the idea.
That could be a different way to tackle the
Or
idea.
maybe that's what
good.
continuous is doing, is trying to change that.
So one of the things, before we move on to anything else, does anybody have anything else that they, because like these are some really good observations, I think.
Is the continuous option in like will give the result only after we end it manually, or it'll like how does the continuous stop the recording actually? So because in the if it is
How do you stop it?
Yeah.
You're saying, okay. So just like there's a start,
then
there's
we
also
have-
an end that you can call, and you would wire that to a button or something.
There is no specific condition like only like these many cap limit saying only 5 sentences to 6 sentences allowed. There's nothing
No,
like that.
and that's actually really tricky because, like, let's say that you wanted to use, like, y'all want to hear what I think is wrong with this API?
Could you have it like catch a keyword or something like that?
What's that?
Could you have it catch a keyword, stop recording and then process?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can. So one of the really tricky things is that if you use this with text-to-speech and you want to make sort of, no, I'm not going to show that. I'm going to. All right. So in the list of things that I imagine when I hear, like, oh, the browser now has a speech recognition thing, I start to imagine, like, oh, think of all the cool things I could do, right? I could make a directory of podcasts that I've downloaded, turn them into text, so that I can do things like index them, skim them, find later stuff that I know I've downloaded and I probably listened to, or at least intended to. Like, it's in a pretty special collection as opposed to all of the other podcasts and things that are out there. If I want to build like tag clouds or whatever I want so I can go back and find exactly what I wanted, I think that would be pretty cool. Speaking of podcasts, I've been talking about maybe doing one with some other people. Imagine that I'm in a studio with 4 other people, all having their own mic. They have separate line inputs, but you see there was nothing about where do you get your sound from, right? It's just automatic. It just gets the mic. It's just, if you speak, it'll hear you. If I speak, it'll hear me. Like, there's nothing unidirectional or anything. So I can't take some sound off of a file. I have to actually play it and have the mic pick it up. I can't take some sound from one channel of an input and have that translated. Or if you, for example, we're going to post this up on YouTube, and if I want that to be accessible, it needs to have captions and a transcript. I could auto-generate that with something like this. And I know that I wanted to use time text markup language to do the captioning. But I also know that that's like very error prone and really best done manually, but it's also really, really painful to do. Like to just sit there and click pause. Okay, this from here to here, I'll say this. So I could let it run through and generate a TTML file and like segment up the speech into where there's pauses and say, here's a TTML file. Like all you have to do is review it and like say, oh, he actually said 2-2, like bishop 2-2, not 2-2, like, you know, actually those are spelled the same, but caps matter, I guess. And also I had an idea for like a simplistic, like Jarvis kind of, I want to talk to my computer and I want it to have ways to understand what I want it to do and then do it, you know? That is actually a place where you need to like manage that really carefully, the on off, because it will hear itself, right? Like if you use this with the time, with the speech to text, you have to make sure that that thing stops before you start and that you are done before it goes. So you have to make it very turn-based. So you have to use that end method like explicitly, but also if there's an error, the error will end it, right? And also ending doesn't mean you won't continue to get results. You can still get results because it's an asynchronous service, right? So if you want to disconnect the channel, you actually want the abort method. The abort method says, I'm done with you now. We don't want anything else. So yeah, like I think these are all really problematic, and they're problematic because like you've said, like what about the service URI? I want to give that to, say, Google Voice does this, and like Google Cloud Platform has a voice recognition. Amazon has a voice recognition service. I don't mean like built into their product. I mean like they have a service that you can call, right? And all of them have, you know, different criteria, right? Like what each one of those is going to get is different, and maybe how much time it's willing to listen to, right? So if we're only doing short chunks of time, like lots of people are willing to do that for free, right? Like that's pretty, takes like that to say 2-2 and then give you the word, right? But if you want to dictate an entire book and send that up maybe a paragraph at a time or something like that, like, I don't know, maybe that's like part of the contract. It gets pretty complicated, I think. So, so here's what I think is wrong with it and what I'd like to see happen. I would like there to be a transcriber object, and you would ask the transcriber to transcribe something, and you would give it an audio stream. So how did you get that audio stream? Well, there's lots of ways to get audio streams. Pick your favorite, right? So I think that's pretty straightforward. It's asynchronous, just like the other. It's promise-based, so pretty straightforward. And that would have a response object. And unlike that other crazy thing, I think the response object should be pretty simple, and it should just have directly on it a transcript and a confidence property. That seems actually pretty straightforward. There's also an event. Remember I was saying, like, there's all those events. There's an event called no match, which is basically saying, hey, I heard you, but I couldn't, to my own internal contractual thing, I know I can't accurately tell you what you're saying, so I have no match for you. So I heard you. It's not like there was an error. I don't know. The answer is I don't know. So it sounds like they're saying we recognize nothing, or that we heard something but it was undefined. So in computer science and JavaScript, we have concepts like the null string and undefined. And so why don't we just use that instead of a whole separate event? And you could check and see if the transcript doesn't exist because it's falsy. And you can say, sorry, I didn't catch that. Or you can just assume that you got it. And but you're thinking those array things turned out to be meaningful. But what if you could just say how many you want, same as before, except this is still a transcript and a confidence property on your main object, right? On your main result object, your response object. Then you have alternatives property, which has alternatives, because that's how the word is used, right? Like to me, I find it like mind blowing that I ask for something and they say, well, here's a whole bunch of alternatives. Alternatives to what? Like, maybe it's just me, but that just doesn't sound right. So I want, what's your best guess? And then what are some alternatives? I think that makes a lot of sense. Does anybody not think that makes sense? Or does anybody think that I'm the one that just completely doesn't understand the word alternatives? Okay, just checking. So then I would like us to actually explain this in terms of a life cycle. The existing design wants you to be able to have a service URI that would work. And so all we have to really do is define the lifecycle in API, and you could then subclass this, and you could create a Google Cloud transcriber. And Google Cloud could just give you this JavaScript file. And it would be just like using a jQuery plugin or something. You just have this simple JavaScript file, and if you just use that, now your transcriber is the Google one. And the nice thing about this is that the contract is very loose. They just have to override, you're going to get a request, you need to make a response, whatever that comes back from that response, you need to turn into this output. So we do that really a lot in the web, right? I mean, like that sort of pattern is it's just a service interface, really. I think it allows us to do a lot of things very nicely that way, and leave the hard problems, box them into a nice, convenient place. And so eventually maybe we can develop the protocol that would be necessary and all that other stuff. And if we ever get there, then you can just say, well, you can add a service URI to your transcriber and it will be done. But not only that, but we'll have the explanation of why, right? And it will be extensible, which is, I think, pretty important. Interestingly, another proposal from someone at Google made a little bit more recently, like within the last 7 or 8 years. Okay, a little bit more recent than that. But it came out with something that is actually considerably closer to this idea. I won't go through it and show it, but unfortunately that idea seems to have fizzled at the moment. So I think nice thing about this is that once we have this low-level API, then you could build the layers on top of it, and you have a nice web platform architecture. So if you had a speech recognizer, you can say, okay, well, it has the on result and on error. We know that, and those just relay the events of the underlying speech recognizer object. Like, so you can do something that makes it easy to automatically pick up the mic input. Like, all that stuff is nice, right? But if you don't expose the places down below, you can't hook into it, and you can't do any of those other use cases because they're entirely black boxed off from you. And I think you could really just expose these two properties and in audio context. That would actually allow you to plug into just about any use case I can think of. You could swap out the transcriber. You could swap out the audio context. And you could do really, really high-level things like this. Specs have been trying to do something like this since the early 2000s. And I know like some of the voice XML stuff actually like led to these high-level declarative interfaces where we can say, I just have a single tag that just wraps an input. And then for most of the web, I have just an input, right? But if I wanted to, I could say a tutu, and it hears what I say and puts it here. So that's kind of neat. It really seems like this idea of like starting with a really low thing and like layering our pieces makes a lot of sense. One of the things that is maybe not obvious at first is something like this sounds really good, but well, even from this rough demo, like, should there be an attribute on the element to auto start, right? Like, what if your whole application is just dictation, right? So you could do that with just a single element if there was an auto start, right? Like, there would be no programming to do. It would just be declarative.
There's no wake word for this.
What's that?
There's no wake word.
Yeah, or that's exactly another thing, right? Could there be a wake word? Somehow somebody asked basically that question, and in describing trying to get to that, I completely lost it. Was it you that asked that about the, like, could you say something? Yeah, like, could you say something to make it stop and start? Well, you can't really say something to make it start because it's not listening, right? But you absolutely can do things to, like, words to key a pause in listening, or words to key an end or abort of listening. You absolutely could do that. So yeah, like, should there be an attribute on here that's like, what is the wake word, so that I'm listening all the time, but I'm only paying attention when you say this, right? Yeah, I mean, because we have these low-level pieces, we can just build a custom element, and we can do lots of experiments. So, like, I can do this, and I can go, well, this is pretty neat, and somebody else can say, well, I really want it to auto-start. So they can just take that, and we can fork it, and we can add that. And then somebody else could say, like, well, why doesn't it just have a paused attribute? And if you have the paused attribute, it's not playing. And then if you remove the paused attribute, it will start playing. And if you put it back, it will stop playing. That's...
So even we can have a button say on key press it starts listening, on key release we can stop the listening.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, there are a lot of APIs that do that, or a lot of demos that do that. I can't remember who it was. Hopefully they're not listening. Somebody very recently, you can look on Smashing Magazine, just did maybe in the past month or two an article, and I believe it was on basically making a voice agent, and that is exactly the approach that she took. When the thing goes down, you start listening. When they lift up, you stop listening. But this is the idea, though. The idea is if we can do the layers, right, then each successive layer is actually just using those things, and it gets very easy to make a tweak and for us to imagine whole new things. And so the cool thing about that, I don't know, probably a lot of you have not heard me talk about this before, but you know, a long time ago, houses didn't have electricity. It's like boggles my mind, but like houses didn't have electricity, and somehow between then and now, houses got electricity. So all these things with like rural electrification and all that kind of stuff, but really the only thing anybody cared about at the time was light bulbs. That is why people added electricity to their homes, was artificial lighting. There's a lot of really amazing things about how much artificial lighting has changed, like the face of the actual planet. Maybe the most interesting thing to me is that originally, you know, they were all just like wall sockets and things where you screw in a light bulb. There were no fans, there were no toasters, there were no electric stoves, there were no hair dryers, there were no, you know, nothing, because like, why would you make that? You can't plug it in, right? Like, I mean, and when they started wiring these homes, there were 3 or 4 competing light bulbs that all like worked differently. They couldn't be manufactured the same. They were trying to compete and corner the market. And then finally, they said, like, we should really standardize on light bulbs. Like, the world is just not going to get right until we standardize on light bulbs. And so all these companies came together and they're like, my God, we got to standardize on light bulbs. But meanwhile, we gave people electricity and everybody was like, think of the things I can do. And suddenly there were toasters and fans and all that kind of stuff. And you know, they all used to screw in. Like you could buy refrigerators that you would screw into the light socket. That was like how we did it, right? Because we gave it to like the masses. Like we gave it to the people who do the tinkering, right? And that's really, I think, like what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to give you, like, give me the low-level bits. Give me the things I can play with, because you'll imagine this, and I'll go, yes, and let me tell you this one other thing that I would like it to do. And, you know, we can imagine, you know, the whole electric world while standards are still worried about the light bulb, right? Yeah, so anyway, the terrible part is that the current API is high level and it doesn't have anything exposed. But there are actually like Google Cloud Platform and Amazon, and there's a whole bunch of them actually. Several of them are like very low cost, like free for up to this much. And other ones, you could host yourself and they would be free. So I want to actually build this proposed API because you can, because ultimately, I told you, like, the only thing that we're really missing is this transcriber, something that can take sound and turn it into text. So I want to build this, and I want to build maybe a couple of layers on top of it too. And I want to build it, and I want to like use it to illustrate in standards that it's a good idea. So if you are interested in that at all, or if you think that you have a business use that would make sense for this, like that you really want to build something, but you need to be able to point it at Amazon because that's who your contract is with, or Google, or whatever, that I think would be maybe a way for you to get a bunch of other minds to help you with that idea for more or less free, because we just want to prove it out. I would like there to be like a real use, but I'm totally willing to just make demos and stuff with it, because if that's all I do, it will be free. Like, there's a lot of free time available for that, but I couldn't create that and then release it out to everybody, because then you would all go on my account and I just don't like you that much. No, seriously. So what we're going to do is every Monday from 6 to 8, I'm going to be online to fiddle with this idea or any uses of the interface that you want to fiddle with. You want to play with things. You want to make a custom element that uses this. You want to figure out how to integrate it into, you want to make a transcription thing. I'll be online from 6 to 8 p.m. every Monday. Not entirely sure where yet. I'm on Twitter, though. You can reach me on Twitter. I'm at Brian Kardell. You can do my website, just bkardell.com. And there you'll find all the things about how to connect with me via every social media possible. So,
How do you spell your name? Spell your name?
last name,
Yeah.
Kardell.
Okay. First name Brian.
That's me, yeah.
You're Ryan.
Yeah. Justin, do you have a in-between on your network?
No.
So I'm curious, in terms of client-side support, you said Android is basically the most consistent or most stable.